Timing on point.
Thank you.
My name is Dare, and I love love. I love life.
That's
This is
easy.
smooth.
Oh, shit, my phone's too much.
Hi, my name is Stella, and sincerely, I have never made a better decision than
Hey,
downloading
Stella.
and using the iInvest app. A friend of mine told me about iInvest, and
Stella
I was
is starting
skeptical.
me.
But eventually, I gave it a try.
No.
Since then, it's been amazing,
Really taking
and
this
I
too
really
personal.
mean that. iInvest helps me buy treasury bills fast and easy, and I can even select how long I want to invest and just start immediately. You want to know what the best part is? It's super easy and protected, making your investments risk-free. So do yourself a favor and download the iInvest app today. Trust me, you won't regret it.
I invest. Make money anywhere, anytime.
Supported by Sterling Bank, your one customer bank.
The Smooth Breakfast presents the headlines, the stories, the news. In-depth analysis of national current affairs.
I have the first stories, but I have the first
Freshly
stories. But
pressed on Smooth
Mics are up.
98.1.
Students live. Welcome, Lagos, and thanks for joining us in time for Freshly Pressed 981. It's a part of Smooth Breakfast with Folu.
and Valentine.
That's right. And this morning for Freshly Pressed, a detailed analysis of newspaper stories, we're joined by our wonderful analysts, two gentlemen in the studio. Ikemesit, he's at Judge Ike on Twitter.
I'm also in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning. And also we have Fred Alison. You can find him on Twitter as Mr. Fred Allison. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
I called
FB
you,
Allison.
FB Allison.
FB Allison.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the one.
Right.
Lagos, join us in conversation as well as the rest of the world. Just go over to our YouTube channel right now. You will be able to catch the live stream, youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. Of course, send us messages to our WhatsApp number as well. That is 0809 4440981, and please feel free to tweet at us. We love the tweets because they're short, they're to the point, and use the hashtag freshlypress981. That's how we see all your messages. And now we go into our first story for this morning. Bayelsa has received 24.16 billion naira of Paris Club refunds from the federal government, and in response to that, Governor Seriake Dixon has ordered the immediate payment of 2 months out of the 3 months of outstanding salary arrears to workers, and 4 months out of the 7 months of pensioner arrears to pensioners in the state. I mean, just doling out the cash here. Ikemesit, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you look at all of the a large chunk of the stories that we have to deal with this morning. You know, like these are the magic of elections, right? You know, so this is not the first time, for example, that Bayelsa and by extension many other states in the country are receiving Paris Club refunds.
Yes.
But to the best of our knowledge, this is probably one of those few times when those funds are being applied towards alleviating the areas of public sector workers. You know, dealing
In
with
such
public sector
swift,
workers.
decisive
Yes,
action.
in such swift, decisive action, and the State Commissioner for Information and Orientation, Maxine Iweriso Maxine, essentially almost trumped it as a as an achievement of the administration, pretty much. So I mean, there is another interesting side to the story, and
Yes.
would get to that, but just look at this as emblematic of some of the more structural challenges that Bayelsa and most of the Nigerian states have in terms of maintaining a public sector workforce which is ab initio unsustainable, as it were. The rule of thumb would typically be that if you are able to comfortably cover the wages and salaries and arrears of your employees, you're in a pretty good state. So when
Yes.
you get to a situation where you are in arrears, then we either have to look at the size of the people you're employing or the size of the ports that you're receiving.
Here's my question, though. We know that this is an issue. It's been an issue for as long as we can remember.
Yeah.
Who is going to solve this problem? Every time somebody whispers in the direction of perhaps we'll cut down an overbloated civil service, immediately we have reactions of strikes, such things going on, but we must bite the bullet. At what point do you think it might become too late for this bullet to be bit? Because I mean, months and months in arrears of pensions and salaries is a horrible way for anyone to live.
Yeah, indeed it is, and I would make the argument that we're probably we're probably past the line of no return. We've been down this circle for way too long. The challenge is that, as with most systemic reforms in the country, in any country really, someone's going to get hurt. And when you consider the fact that in most states in this country, this state government is the largest employer of labor, again, a not so good sign as to the health of a lot of our states.
Okay.
It goes against the grain of populist opinion for you to be instituting reforms that will necessarily lead to the retrenchment of more workers, considering the fact that the employment rate in this country is not so good. So yeah.
Okay. And very quickly, you spoke about the other side of this story, criticism by the Minister of State Agriculture, Mr. Heineken Lokobiri.
Yeah.
He said that the state debt profile had reached 800 billion, described it as disgraceful. Well, actually, it worrisome marks and described that criticism as disgraceful. But I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Indeed, yeah. So the actual debt portfolio of the state, and I had this checked out, is 123 billion. So essentially, Maxine called Heineken Lokobiri rather colorfully out on his figures, advising him to either, and this is a direct quote, educate himself or engage a brilliant young graduate to assist him. Well, considering the fact that most brilliant young graduates know how to Google, it's yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
Let's move on. Fred, I'm coming to you next. Speaking of brilliant young graduates, let's talk about people who are applying their trade across the economic community of West African states. So Nigerian traders threaten to occupy ECOWAS Secretariat. This is over the closure of businesses in Ghana. In what some might describe as a rather worrying development, we're told that over 400 businesses have been shut down. This is under the coordination of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. We're being told that these Nigerians had reached out several times, tried to alert the government, but not much seems to have been done. What are your thoughts on this?
I think as you said, troubling. 400 traders, it says, and it's the stipulations that have been put on them. You have to have a minimum of $1 million. It says in the article to have a store. That's a strenuous barrier. Who can, how many people can afford that? I think, and then I looked into one of the reasons ECOWAS was formed, because they're going after, they're reaching out to Buhari, the President Buhari,
Yes.
and the ECOWAS members. It's for economic inclusion across the West African states,
Yes.
and be able to trade freely, So I think it's a worrisome development. I don't know what it's encouraging the Ghanaian government to take this kind of approach, but it affects 400 businesses is quite a lot.
That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
It's quite a big trigger. The traders were wielding placards
Yeah.
with many statements, including Ghana wants the AFCTA Secretariat but clamps down on African traders. Rather damning stuff, especially looking at the fact that Africa is trying to get into free trade across all African state borders. So if we're seeing this with some of our closest neighbors, how could continental free trade really work?
Yeah, and this had happened since July, since there was there was a legislation that was passed in July in Ghana. It's sad.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Fred. Ikemesit, back to you for this next one. Speaking of very sad things, Osinbajo is in Kogi as a flood kills 108 people, displaces 141,369. But really, the figure of people affected is closer to over 400,000 people that have been affected by the flood in about 50 local government areas in the country. The National Emergency Management Agency put out that figure, put out the statements, and really just trying to contain this. Now, the Vice President did pledge that the federal government would try and assist. They pleaded with people to accommodate one another, especially in this trying period. Says we're not really sure how, but we're going to help. But so far, only 3 billion naira of the 12.13 billion that's needed to provide relief materials. Not to talk about replacing people's homes, not helping with their damaged farmlands, just relief materials. Only 3 billion naira of 12.13 billion has been released. Ikemesit, any hope on the horizon?
Well, first and foremost, let me do something that I do not do very often, and really commend the federal government and especially the Vice President for at least having the air of proactiveness in terms of getting out of the message, going out there, meeting people, engaging with the people. It's something which has not happened enough during the life cycle of this administration that
Yes.
now that it's happening, it feels almost surreal when it's really something that is supposed to be,
It should be standard.
it should be standard. It should be part of the standard government response. Now to the figures. Yeah, Val. I think I took your cue on that. It'll be interesting to see where the monies come from. We will look at another story where the government was able to find some money to address a situation that has been subsisting for a while. So in relative terms, considering that this is the federal government that we're dealing here, it shouldn't be too much of a drag for them to be able to find the money to be able to make up the shortfall for this. But like you said, we've got to deal with the long-term effects of this. And like we discussed, we talked about when the flood story really broke last week. We talked
Yes.
about this last Tuesday.
Yes.
We've got to think of a more holistic means of addressing these situations. Essentially, what NEMA and NIMET, the meteorological agency, said when they were issuing their flood warnings is that this would essentially get worse
Yeah.
because of climate change.
Yeah.
Some of the most intense rainy seasons that we've had have occurred in recent years, and so this is a trend that will probably continue. Now is probably the time for us to look at better urban planning practices, to look at instituting more modern agricultural practices that will ensure that people are not necessarily in nature's way when these situations occur.
But here are a couple of things. One, we're told that a number of the deceased persons ended up that way because they went back to their farms to try and rescue their goods and products. I mean, what could be done in ways of education? Because there are people that will still try. I mean, even on airplanes, we're told, basic instructions to leave everything and go. But if there is, sometimes when there are emergency situations, you see people still struggling to try and take their worldly possessions. Another question that would be, the states are also allocated emergency funds, and they have these funds. When are we going to get to a place where the states will become transparent with how these funds are being used, especially states that do have floodplains, that do experience flooding regularly every year? These states experience it, perhaps not to the extent we see it now, but every year. What is being done, and how do we hold these states accountable?
Well, to your first question, I think now is the time for probably like a wide-ranging national public service campaign. And I just want to ask you guys, all of you guys in the studio, when was the last time in this country, when was the last time we had a really, really wide-ranging national public service campaign on any issue? It used to be fairly common, interestingly, during the military era, right? But it's not really been a thing in recent times. So I think when it comes to affecting real wider societal change, we need to do more than just get people to come in front of the cameras, get people in the radio booths and all of those things to talk about this. We need a full campaign, radio service jingles, people going out to increasingly drum the stories, extension workers going out to the communities to talk about those things. So we need to do that. So the second bit, I do know we have an ecological fund that is managed by the federal government in custody for the states. In fact, there was a bit of a yapping on between the federal government and the states up until very recently in terms of access to the ecological fund.
Yes.
The federal government eventually made disbursements out of that fund to the states about, I think, in February, March, and April, which sort of preempted the rainy season. Now, I do understand that the government did not make those disbursements with the mind that there were going to be intense floods during the rainy season. So it will be interesting, like you said, for more transparency in terms of the handling of funds with respect to the environment to be looked at. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Up next, speaking of the environment, the federal government yesterday disclosed that from next year, they will commence the revocation of the licenses of oil companies that failed to stop flaring of gas in their operations in the country. The story is in from the Vanguard newspaper, and we know that over the years we've heard the federal government say that they'll take punitive action, this will happen, that will happen. Now they're saying they're going to revoke licenses. That's a huge deal, all to stop gas flaring. Your thoughts on this, Fred, and how do you think the oil companies are going to take this one?
Whenever anyone comes after your pocket, you take it serious, right? So I think if this can be implemented or taken, proactive steps can be taken to actualize this, the oil and gas companies would take this steps to actually do what it takes, right? I'm from a gas flaring community. I'm from Bonny, actually, and we've seen a lot of issues in regards to the kinds of rains that we have there, the effect of it,
Serious
health effects.
environmental
Yes,
problems.
exactly. So although we've had constant light for 13 years, I must promote.
Okay, so
But
happy for you guys.
which is from the gas, the gas production there. But we're now seeing the effect of having, gas flares. And the other thing is like gas. We're like the ninth. We have the ninth gas reserve in the world. So that's one of our prime, resource that we're just wasting away. The war in Syria is allowing gas, like the gas pipes from Iran and Kuwait, and they're competing with Russia to get it to Europe to see how viable gas is, and we're just burning it away. It doesn't make any sense where we're not capitalizing on our resource, safer energy source,
Cleaner energy.
Cleaner energy, job creation, more revenues coming in, more to our GDP. So it makes sense. Right. I don't know what it takes though. What is the cost implications it would take for this for companies to implement this? But they need to be thinking. They have to roadmap to really stopping gas flaring.
Thank you very much for that, friend.
Quick message up on WhatsApp. Yinka said, commend the FG over flood. This thing is an annual ritual. It's more than just NEMA issuing flood warnings, but we had over 10 months to plan against this effect from last year. It's like there's no long-term solution to this. Guess what? After Lekki went below water level, a massive man-made canal was built. That's proactiveness. Let's spend the 3 billion naira wisely, is what he said. And MI from Akoka says, what a wahoo. Political will is so strong these days. Suddenly, the machinery of state moves at the speed of light. I'm beginning to think we should have elections every other year. Motives aside, I'm happy that some workers would at least get something light. Hashtag 2019.
Yes, indeed.
Let's move on very quickly to this next story. It's from ThisDay newspaper. Our federal government approves 42.7 billion naira for ex-Airways workers, public Varsities. So 15 years after the liquidation of the Nigerian Airways, the federal government seems to have responded and has approved 22.68 billion naira for the ex-workers of the defunct national carrier. And the new finance minister, Hajia Zainab Ahmed, communicated this directive from the president on Monday at a meeting with the ex-workers of the liquidated carrier and members of the academic staff union of universities. They said they are getting, that's the universities are getting 20 billion naira for rehabilitation of the basic facilities. Ikemesit, your thoughts?
Yeah, so talk about the magic of elections, and like one of our listeners said, government at the speed of light.
Yeah.
Right. So two things to unpack here. First, when we had the issue when the Nigerian air soap opera was going on, I remember folks like SBM Intelligence, for example, said it is not viable for you to talk about going to look for $150 to $300 million, right, to float a national carrier that almost no one has any appetite for, almost no one has an interest in. I was essentially just a populist mechanism masquerading as an attempt to solve a non-existent economic problem. When you have this kind of hangover over the primary flag carrier that we had in the past. I mean, the total retirement benefits owed to affected staffs of the Nigerian Airways is 45 billion naira, and that was an agreed sum. The actual sum, the original sum, as at the time of liquidation in 2001, was about 78 billion naira, right? So 22.68 billion naira, good step in the right direction. We still have an extra 20 odd billion naira to fix on that, so that's good on the part of the federal government. Until the actual disbursements happen, my fingers will be crossed on that. And this only happened really because the ex-airway workers greeted Zainab Ahmed, with a protest, as it were. They had been protesting consistently when Kemi Adeosun was there, but nothing happened. So make of that what you will. Now, second bit, with respect to the universities, ASU had threatened another shutdown.
And then
right, of the universities, and then they responded. Now, ASU has threatened shutdowns in the past, and in some cases has actually shut down. But again, like the listener said, hashtag 2019 is in the air. So, in addition to all of the issues that this current administration is having, you do not want a situation where Nigerian Airways pensioners and public university workers are essentially downing weapons in the midst of what will probably be the most competitive election season that we've had since we returned back to democracy in 1999. So the government is essentially just trying to when you look at the ecology fund, you look at the effort to revoke licenses of offense for glass flaring, you look at all of these things, the government is just trying to quell fires everywhere. They probably need maybe a few floods to wash out some of these
Yeah,
fires.
but what are they now?
The real
teaching
question
us?
would
They're
be-
now teaching us to like wait and ambush you when it's like
Well-
election season.
Yeah, but well, it's sad, but at least they're addressing it. What if they were not doing anything? Yeah.
The real question.
Then there won't be our government, right?
I think.
Let's just go on. Let's just move on.
Thank you, Ikemesit. I'm sure some people are listening and asking what ministry is next, really, to get this kind of response. Now, Punch newspaper has this next story. Your SAN rank can be withdrawn. The CJN warns lawyers. So this happened. The Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onoyan, on Monday warned 30 newly appointed senior advocates of Nigeria that the rank could be withdrawn from them if they abused it. And he actually made a statement at the inauguration of about 30. Actually, they said there were supposed to be 31 lawyers who were meant to be given this rank of SAN, and then one was discovered to have gone through some sharp practices at the courts to get some documents that were forged. Fred, when you go into the story, really, he made some calls, mentioned some cases that have been treated in courts, and the strides that the legal system in Nigeria is taking to actually just revamp the system in general. What are your thoughts on this?
I like what you said, revamp. I like what I read. Hopefully, it's beyond just speaking, right? Like they said, they went through 4,000 presented cases when they were like scrutinizing them. I like the fact that they're reinforcing that they need to be, upholding of what it takes to be a senior advocate.
Yes.
There was something else there that really got to me. It was like they went through their personal income tax and the schemes that they have for the younger counselors, right? So it indicates that for you to be a SAN, you have to be a thorough leader and also have things in place for growing other lawyers, to make them come to the position of SAN. So I like that specifically. So in other words, from the standpoint of what the Chief Justice was saying, everything seems good. Just hopefully that we can,
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
planning out.
the fact that it's coming from the Chief Justice of Nigeria just gives a sweeping, I wouldn't say generalization, just sweeping caution to every lawyer in Nigeria and some other
Yeah.
people who have the outlook that the judiciary system has been tampered with.
Folu, do you feel
I have a
cautioned?
question, yeah. Sorry, as the lawyers in the room, I'm just going to ask, is this a new development, really, that we're seeing people who have forged court documents or documents in general to get the SAN title, and would this be the first time that the Chief Justice is actually speaking out on this matter?
Unfortunately, no, right? And so it's one of those things that we as lawyers know, but is hardly ever talked about and remarked about, because again, there are rules around the kinds of commentary that you can make, which was why when I saw this story, I just easily just
Avoided
respected
it.
myself, and
You
avoided
see?
it. Yes, but it does, like you say, highlight the fact that our justice system and by extension the legal profession is going through something of an image crisis, and we need to do better to enforce and uphold standards. And so in this case, the CGN's remarks are a good step in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Something that might seem like a good step in the right direction, or just a means of caution, really. The former Inspector General of Police in this story from Guardian newspaper is that's Mr. Solomon Arase, is calling on Nigeria, in their move to deploy military personnel to the hotspots around the country, saying that the country has been experiencing over deployment of this military personnel to maintain law and order. And in the same vein, he's saying that the governors should consider holding more regular security meetings. It seems as if the state governments are complacent and they're leaving the federal government to actually do all the work. And we see in most cases private companies employing the services of these soldiers who are supposed to have, more important roles to play. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, indeed. And so first, the context to that is, One, the job of maintaining the security of the country is in the hands of the military,
Yes.
right? But Arase does make a fine point, which, analysts have been making for years, and SBM talked about this in 2016, which that our military is overstretched. But I think it came out an infographic just last month, just highlighting this fact. The military is deployed as 36. No, now I think it's 32 or 33, right? In 2016 it was 30. Now I think 32 or 33. Nigeria has 36 states for all sorts of different reasons, and in the vast majority of the states, the functions that the military are serving should be in the ordinary competence of the police, right? So this, on the one hand, highlights the fact that the military remains one of those few institutions in the country which can be entrusted with anything, even if their actual track record is and leaves much to be desired. And secondly, it highlights the dysfunction in the style and the system of policing that we have in this country. It's just very rich for me, and Folu and I were talking about this off air, that Mr. Arase is making these comments and these remarks as an ex-IGP.
Yeah.
He was in a position to do something about this for years. What happened? He wasn't even making comments like this, let alone doing anything remotely resembling any attempt at addressing the issue. So it was a case of, what was it we described about the wax and the wool falling off his faces, and he could now see the lights,
Maybe from
That
hindsight, he's seen some things that could have been done or can be done better now, in the light of situation.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown. The shackles have fallen off his hands and feet. Perhaps he feels a bit lighter and is able to comment now.
Yeah, and do you know what people over the years and centuries have who have had the opportunity to wear the crown do in those kind of situations?
What?
They hire people who don't wear crowns to advise them and actually listen to the advice. Is all I'm going to say on this.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on now very quickly to Vanguard for this next story. NAFDAC develops guidelines to drive growth in cosmetics production. Fred, I'll come to you with this. So, in essence, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, has developed a set of guidelines aimed at driving cosmetics production in the country. They said they include guidelines for micro and kitchen scale cosmetic producers and the guidelines for medium and large scale chemical marketers, distributors, veterinary products tagged. They made mention of this at the event that was tagged a date with the DG NAFDAC Director General. So it seems like the Professor Christina Adeyeye made this comment and scale down on the policies that will drive growth in cosmetics production. What are your thoughts?
I think this is a really good development. First of all, it's in line with doing business, ease of doing business, which Nigeria is ranked terribly in. And then it's just what it speaks to, right? So some of the things they've stated is that they reduced the number of documents, staff strength, the size of the room. They're encouraging shared spaces. They're encouraging shared equipment. They're discouraging people using their kitchen or things for like maybe your cooking, like living, and then using it for production. But when you just look at the space in and of itself, and you look at our culture, you look at what we like. So we're a young population, right? So social media, we're technology savvy. So social media is a big thing here. If you want to easily add to the GDP, you want to add to growth, there's a low barrier to entry space. Selfie has gone from being a trend, a fad, to a staple.
Yes.
And that's what everyone does. So if you're talking about like creating stuff for people for looks, you're talking about we're the biggest population of black people, innovation in black skin and technology in that,
Yes.
and sharing that with the world. This just encourages a sector that can easily bring a lot to our growth.
Yes.
And before now has been operating illegally. basically.
Illegally.
Yes.
And
Nice
We've got
tone to end.
what was that?
That's a nice tone to end.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought a little bit of
Very
positive
rare on a
sprinkling
Tuesday.
there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
it's a very rare Tuesday.
We've got messages coming in, so let's round up with some of your messages. Mudukwe, that's Mudukwe Hazizat up on Twitter, says the solution is simple, talking about over-bloated civil service. Cut down on the cost of government, borrowing, and white elephant projects. Why should the government owe salaries whilst governors still spend over 1 million naira on meals in state houses? Miss Ayomide, I'm just loving the Vice President, says Professor Osinbajo is always redefining leadership by showing love, insisting on going into the mess hall to taste food by himself, putting himself in their place and encouraging them. A leader who's clearly concerned about the welfare of the people, and it shows in his acts. Yes. While Adegoke Adedonyi says 108 people dead in Kogi, an avoidably huge number. Was there no prior warning? Yes, there was actually, Adegoke. But what happens to sensitization of the people? What's the NOA doing? This is very sad, but may God rest the dead. Mr. G Quest sent in this one. What a tragedy once more in Kogi State. People won't be going back to endanger their lives if they felt that the government would come to their aid. More likely than not, their life savings were all they had on the farm. Absolutely correct there. And Bolaho, thanks for sending in the message. While up on WhatsApp, Big T says on the NLC strike, here we go again. Lots of big English, picketing, protesting, meetings, government promises, threats, hunger and sacks. And at the end, nothing gets done. And then we will be back here once more. While Henry says, can the federal government revoke operating licenses? I don't think so. Last Friday, the federal government published the 2017 budget implementation report. Penalty from gas flaring was in the top 10 revenue stream of the government. So I will suggest an increase in penalty per cubic feet flare. Make it hurt. Revocation will take us to court, and that is a long route.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Mr. Eddie Alison and Judge.
Yes.
We revoke your. What are we going to revoke now?
Speaking license.
We'll pick up one of the stories in time for Lagos Talks 91. That's at 9 o'clock. But coming up next in 15 minutes, we'll talk entertainment inside of the grapevine. Keep it here.
I invest. Investing made easy.
Thanks, guys.
By Sterling Bank.
So you wanted to set me up with the sand.
Me? No.